Hey guys, welcome back to the Pulling Curls podcast. Today on episode 189, we are talking about what your providers think about when you are in labor. Let's untangle it. Hi, I'm Hillary Erickson, the curly head behind the Pulling Curls podcast, Pregnancy and Parenting Untangled. There's no right answer for every family, but on this show, we hope to give you some ideas to make life simpler at your house. Life's tangled, just like my hair. Okay, excited to have today's guest on the podcast. It's actually her second time. She is a certified nurse midwife in rural Pennsylvania. I want to introduce today's guest, Juli Pyle. Do you feel prepared for your delivery? In just 3 short hours, you can be prepared for the confident, collaborative delivery you want. You'll know what to expect and how to talk with your healthcare team, and there are no boring lessons in this class. I'll use humor, stories from my 20 years in the delivery room to engage both of you. I love how Alyssa told me that she found herself laughing at things that used to sound scary. Most of all, you guys are going to be on the same page from bump to bassinet. Join the online prenatal class for couples today. You can save 15% with coupon code UNTANGLED. You can find the link in the show notes. Hey, Juli, welcome back to the Pulling Curls podcast.
Hi, Hillary. Good to be here.
Yeah, Juli was on in a previous episode where we talked about why you might want an induction.
I got some really good responses from that, and I think a lot of people liked that episode.
I just think people have to consider what they're not thinking, which is really hard sometimes because you think what you're thinking is right?
That's exactly it. We all think that we're on the right, train of thought, and it's not always that way.
Yeah. So Juli and I were chitty-chatting after it's been a while that there was a TikTok that was filmed a while ago with nurses telling their icks about labor patients and the labor community and people in general just lost their minds over it. And of course, the labor nurses just started attacking each other, which I always love. Right, Juli?
Oh, it's a whole different world when that happens.
Which that is a full other episode. But a lot of people who were going in to have a baby were like, I can't believe you guys would ever think things like this. And obviously they shouldn't have recorded it. That's my number one. It's not something that needs to be public. Things that frustrate us in labor and delivery, just because I don't think it should be public anywhere. Other ones I saw, when you were at a hotel, things that bothered them,
Yeah, I felt no matter what the profession is, there's things that happen, but definitely that is not something that should have ever left the nurses' brains or their very private conversations.
Yes. So we want to say that right off the bat, people need to be, I do a lot of Disney stuff. And when Disney creators or Disney employees talk about their icks about when people ask things at Disneyland, I'm kind of I paid so much money to be there. I shouldn't be rude. I'm not saying I should be rude, but if I have a dumb question, that's part of your job.
And, as people that work around birth all the time, things that we think about are so different because the people that we're taking care of, this is their first time. It's not our first time. We've been doing it for a very long time, but their first time is different. And the things they're going to ask make sense to them or they wouldn't ask it.
Yeah. But that isn't to say that we're not human. And a lot of labor nurses have young children at home, may not have gotten the most sleep that they've ever wanted to have in their lives. That was me. A lot of times I would come to work and I was so tired. You had taken care of a sick kid all night and then you're at the hospital and you're just this is a forever long shift. And so stuff frustrates you. Am I right, Juli?
Yeah, I think as we're talking about this today, understanding that we're all people. The labor nurse is a person, the patient that's having the baby, that's a person. We're all having these experiences together, and just being kind and considerate to each other goes a long way.
Ugh, doesn't it? Because it ultimately just comes down to communication, which we're going to talk about at the end. But communication is hard. It's hard in marriage. It's hard in the workplace. It's hard at Disneyland.
Yep. Coming up on 24 years being married, and you'd think I'd have it nailed down, right? But no, communication is still a struggle.
Yes. It's so hard. And hopefully you guys realize that too. It's hard to communicate with your partner, especially during pregnancy, because you have all those crazy hormones that are taking you all over the place.
Yeah, you don't even know what's going on in your own body, let alone telling somebody else about it.
Right. Sometimes I'm just no words. I'm just running on DOS, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think a lot of times patients think we think specific things will I poop at delivery? Or what does your labor nurse think if you don't have your leg shaved at delivery? I can tell you she thinks absolutely nothing. Or no, she's thinking a million things. She's thinking, when will I be able to eat? Right?
Yeah. The things that they are thinking about are not the things that we care about at all.
No. Or what's my patient in the other room doing? Right? I'm looking at her monitor while I'm talking to you. Or like, there's just so many things that are on our mind that you don't understand. Same as Disneyland, same as being at a hotel. Like, employees just have different things on their mind than you would ever think they thought about.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think that's even more true in the case of, when people are having babies.
Yeah. So I think I have seen on TikTok a lot of people that are like, when you say XYZ, you think I'm like judging you as a parent. And we're literally just like checking the box. Like, are you going to breastfeed? And you say no. I'm like, I don't care. I'm literally just checking the boxes. There is absolutely no judgment going on during box checking time.
Yeah. I think our hope is that you've done some research and some thinking before you've come in to actually have the baby. And so what you've decided or what your thoughts are, those are yours, and we're there to be a part of it, but we're not there to judge it.
No. And I guess if you told me you weren't going to feed your baby at all, then I would be like, okay,
maybe.
Now we need to have some conversation about this, right? Or if you were just like, the baby's going to eat, then I would be like, oh, wow. Okay. But,
Exactly.
People are surprised that we get those random answers that are kind of like, I have never considered that the baby's going to have to eat after delivery, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, like, you have to realize that we are getting such a huge spectrum of patients. We have gotten some weird answers sometimes to those checkbox questions. That you're
So true.
Just going to put in a social work consult right here.
And I think you touched on this, like as nurses, we're busy with a lot of different components. And so our brain is probably thinking about something in the other room, something that somebody said earlier in the shift, than focusing on judging what you're choosing for your, your birth journey. So,
yeah. And one of the weird things about labor and delivery that it's not as true on other units. Not only am I watching Jane, who's my other patient in another room, I'm also watching Marge's strip. I'm also watching, we glance up at that strip and we within seconds can just take in that entire screen and just make sure all of our coworkers are okay. And that's really important that we're doing that too.
Yeah. You're thinking about the nurse that just called off and what are you going to do for the next shift? Or, there's a million things but at the same time, we really are focused on exactly what you need and hoping to make everything perfect for you too. So
yeah, it's a lot like parenting, right? Because you're like, what are we going to have for dinner? But at the same time, you're playing with your kids,
Yep, exactly.
We're the multitaskers of the world. Julie had a really interesting point about how doctors versus how a midwife or a nurse might take your choices in labor. So what did you mean by that, Julie?
Well, I guess, talking about the nurse perspective first, I mean, as a nurse, you're trying to balance what the doctor orders are, what the patient wants, what else is happening on your shift. Like, there's all these things going on. So I think as a nurse, when we get a question, we're like, I really wish your doctor or midwife had talked to you about this in the office before showing up for your induction,
Yes.
I really wish you knew this information because I'm happy to talk to you about it, but now it's new information for you and you haven't been able to even think about it, So I think that, we're as nurses are battling a lot of those other pieces that are coming at us. And we are the one that's like right in the middle of it all.
Yeah. And a lot of our need is balancing the unit, right? Because if it's too busy, I literally cannot start your induction because it's just not safe.
Yeah, exactly. And just that piece of it, that like you've never met this nurse before, but they're literally the person you're going to see the most and you're going to interact with the most, more than your doctor, more than your midwife,
Yeah. That's why you got to say your affirmations. I'm going to have a great labor team, right? So
That's right.
Come in expecting them to be a great labor team and they will rise to your occasion.
And the nurse is the one person you have the least control of who it's going to be, So it's an interesting dynamic.
Or who it changes to. Because it doesn't, just because you get Sally doesn't mean Sally's staying with you forever. She may deliver across the hall.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think, as a nurse, we're really trying to put it all together for you. And so a lot of times our thoughts are probably actually directed at the doctor. Like when your patient says, oh, the doctor said we're going to do this. And you're like, that is not how this works.
Yeah.
That's my thought versus worrying about the specifics of it,
Yes, there's much more judgment probably going to the other healthcare providers
Yeah,
than there is to the
probably.
patient by far.
And I certainly don't want to act like I'm speaking for all doctors everywhere or all midwives everywhere, even though I am a midwife. So I'll just put that out there as a disclaimer. But my experience has been, that your physician, your doctor is going to be much more focused on the timeline of things, focused on what's happening when he or she's not there versus the whole experience. And I think as a nurse, we're a little more focused on the whole picture, if we can be, and many midwives are going to be a little more involved, a little more receptive to some of the different thoughts or ideas that might be coming from your birth plan or what you want to have happen. So those are three very distinct different parts of the journey, and you're going to get different responses through all of them.
Yeah, because you have to think that a doctor is trained to come from a very medical perspective. So when you're like, I'm going to have a 3-course meal right now, that doctor is thinking, what if we end up in a C-section and you aspirate, right? Whereas a midwife or a nurse is like, okay, you might throw up, but here's the bag just in case, right? Like,
yeah, that's exactly right.
They're thinking 20 miles complications down the road. Whereas we're like, well, she's hungry and we know that her uterus needs glucose to contract. So let's get some in there.
Yeah. And that goes back to my point of like, your nurse is with you the most out of anyone in the process. And they know you need food and they know you want to move and you want to do these different things. So yeah, I just think, a doctor's perspective and their thoughts in the journey are going to be a lot more regimented and checkbox. And again, I hope that's not offensive to any doctors listening, and most midwives are a little in between both, right? They know we have to do some things to have a baby and make sure everybody's safe, but also understand a little bit more about the whole person that's having the baby.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, I have seen midwives that act just like a doctor.
Right.
Like there is absolutely no difference in how I get orders or what they want to do. And I've seen doctors who are way more like a midwife than even a lot of the earthy birthy midwives I've seen. Right.
Yep.
So that just comes from knowing what your doctor is going to do. That being said, almost every doctor still has those complications on their mind because that's what their job is. That's what we're paying them to do.
And they're trained to be the person that is the most responsible in whatever situation happens, they're the ones that it falls on. So of course they're going to have a different thought process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it all boils down to communication, which I absolutely hate because it's so much easier when people read my mind.
I haven't had that experience yet.
I don't know. No one's ever read my mind.
Nope.
But if you ever wonder, like, what is going on, like, if you want to know what the nurse thinks, she can't tell you everything that she's thinking, mostly because we kind of have to be like, well, your doctor said XYZ, but she can convey that through body language or like things that they encourage you to say. Usually if I was like adamant that I really didn't think this patient needed a C-section and they were like, well, what do you think? And I'd be like, well, what do you think? And I'll be like, baby looks good right now. I'm not worried about baby. If I was worried about baby, I would be moving a lot swifter right now, right? Something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe, a good way of framing it is what do you think about the hepatitis B vaccine? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or what do other people do? Because that's what you're asking as a patient when you're saying, should I do this? Like you're wondering what else is happening, out in the world and what are people doing? Or, I think it's always valuable to come in and say, here's what I've been thinking about the birth or the labor versus here's my birth plan on a piece of paper. And that's the end of it. Let's talk about it. Again, communicate. Let's discuss it because it's important to you or you wouldn't be bringing it up. And we have a lot of experience that we can talk about.
Right.
That are talking about those specific choices.
Yeah. But we don't know if you're the person who takes Tylenol at the first whiff of a headache. We don't know if you're the person who doesn't take Tylenol until you're vomiting with your migraine. Like we don't know you at all. And everybody's so different.
Yeah. And I like to approach a subject like if a patient's like, well, do I need a C-section right now? Then I just very matter-of-factly say, here's what the evidence shows us, right? Here's the research. Right now, this would not be an indicated C-section. Right? We can continue. Baby looks good. Everything looks okay. We can continue. Or on the flip side, saying this really isn't a normal situation and I think we need to proceed a different way. That goes a long way in communicating those ideas and those thoughts that we're having.
Yeah. But I have seen on social media a lot lately, especially because we're recording this soon after the holidays. Everyone was saying doctors push holiday inductions. And I'm like, I think doctors offer holiday inductions because patients appreciate knowing that it's an option, because if your baby's due on Christmas, most people aren't like, yes, I'd love my kid to have a Christmas birthday, right?
If I'm going into a patient room and I know that their due date is the 24th of December, I'm going to ask them, what do you think about having a baby on Christmas? And if they say, can I be induced? Like, I don't want to do that, then we'll talk about it. Or if they say, I really don't want to be induced and I'm hoping baby comes after the holiday, then we'll talk about it,
Yeah. So they really are. I think it's best to just think that they're offering. Like, if you just have that in the back of your mind, my doctor is now offering me a C-section, right? It's my job, just like at a used car lot, because it sometimes does feel like a used car lot when a doctor says, I really think it's time for a C-section, yada, yada. Because I am always like, we can totally leave the room and you guys can talk about it yourselves, just like you do at a car lot, right?
That's true.
And I'd be like, this is awkward. But unless there's a ton of staff in there and you can tell that it is very urgent and baby is not doing well, that's really a different choice than your doctor's offering you induction. He's offering you a C-section or whatever. I think if you just start off with that, what do you think, Julie?
Yeah. And I think what makes the biggest difference in all these scenarios is choosing your care team, that looking at different perspectives. Like, does the medical frame of mind really suit what you like? Because then a doctor through the whole process might be perfect. But if you have other ideas throughout what you want the pregnancy and the labor to look like, a midwife might be a really great option. Sometimes you can have a combination of both, but I think that there's a lot of different ways to go about it that people don't think about that part of it. Like, they think I just have to go to the closest doctor's office, but that may not be the best scenario to fit everything they want. So it's a process and a journey, and it really does start at the beginning of pregnancy.
Yeah. Or it doesn't have to happen at that first appointment. If you show up at the doctor, because I had a first appointment that the guy was just a loser and I switched. And yeah, it's awesome to go in, get that first ultrasound, get that blood work, because sometimes it is kind of hard to get that first appointment in sometimes. And then if you don't like them, switch, because you're not tied to them forever. Thank goodness.
And again, going back to how we might think about these things. I mean, if I've seen you a few times, but it's just not meshing for some reason and you decide to go somewhere else, I'm not mad about it. I'm glad that you're making a decision that makes sense for you and it's not going to hurt my feelings. So you don't have to worry about what I'm thinking in that moment at all.
Oh, I love that, because I think a lot of people will think, I like them and they've spent a lot of time and discussed things with me, but am I going to hurt their feelings to switch practices? No.
And it's never too late to switch. I mean, you can switch at the end of pregnancy. You can switch after your first visit. That's okay if it starts to make more sense for you.
Really? I have seen so many patients about 30 weeks. It gets real hard to change. The doctors are unwilling to take them.
Some practices are a little more hesitant to do that, but there's no rules or laws or anything saying that you can't,
Yeah, you can definitely
it might be a little trickier.
Yeah, call around. And I really liked your thing that a midwife is usually coming from just different thoughts in the background to start with, right? And so I would definitely plug for you guys to look into midwives. I've had so many friends that are really nervous because they think it's a lay midwife. And Julie is not a lay midwife.
We could do a whole nother episode about that.
I know. How much schooling have you had, though?
I have a master's degree in nursing.
Yeah.
So it's the equivalent of a nurse practitioner.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that it's that same level of expertise. And I do try and tell people that a certified nurse midwife is truly an expert in normal physiologic birth and even some high risk components we get special training in, and so it's not like, oh, I don't want an epidural and I want to have a baby at home, I guess I can have a midwife. I do all of the vaginal deliveries that I do are in hospital, and it's wonderful. People get whatever care they want. They can labor in the tub, they can have an epidural, or they can have no IV and do absolutely nothing, medical, so to speak.
Yeah. And the beauty is you're also trained in knowing when you're like, this is above my pay grade. We need to get an OB in this situation. So then you have a doctor that you hand off to, correct?
Yep. That's correct. Yep.
And sometimes they just call that OB, and sometimes they hand you off to them and they're like, it's better for you to see them for the rest of your prenatal care, right? Like, it's not always just one and done, like you never see them again. Correct?
Yeah, especially where I practice, we collaborate really extensively. So even at extremely high risk, let's say preeclampsia, history of postpartum hemorrhage, maybe even a VBAC, that could all be happening in the same person. So the labor process would still be something I could help manage, but the obstetrician would be making sure lab work, medications, any follow-up was, appropriate for that person.
Yeah. So I really love bringing that part in because everybody comes from kind of where their background is. I think it's important to know that midwives have a different viewpoint that they're coming from, which I adore. I love midwives. If you guys are hesitant to consider a midwife, I say go try one out and see what you think.
Yeah. And there's no perfect fit, you know. I feel like I connect well with my patients and I really love what I do, but there's some people who don't appreciate exactly how I do things. And so they want the obstetrician or they want a different midwife. Or in our area, there's a lot of lay midwives and they choose that. And it's just a matter of looking through what's available to you. Not everybody has access to midwives, unfortunately. Hopefully that'll change in the future, but we're a really good option for a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay. Great episode, Julie. Thanks so much for coming on.
Good to see you again, Hillary.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode because I think it is so important to, one, be, if you want to know what somebody else is thinking, you can always just ask them, but also mostly just communicating with your healthcare team, telling them what you want, asking them what they're thinking, all those different kinds of things. Come join me in the Bump to Bassinet bundle where we have a provider communication bonus video. We talk more about talking between your partner and you. We talk all about communication. So I think it's going to be a great step for you guys to come join me in there. Stay tuned. We have 2 episodes coming up that I know you are going to be interested in. Next week, we are talking about how to get your baby to sleep. And then the week after that, we are talking about tearing at delivery and all that encompasses. So 2 topics that I know you're interested in. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. The Pulling Curls podcast grows when you share us on social media or leave a review. If you do, please tag us so that we can share and send you a virtual hug, which frankly is my favorite kind of hugging. Until next time, we hope you have a tangle-free day.